nu masnúb do foiisi a tá riachtanas sa bhreise acu na bhfuil ag gopur agus na rú riamh gopur sa stáit seo agus na bhfuil a rialtas idir factá. We see this morning that RTE has shone another light on an issue that we have had to raise in this House for far too long and for far too often. That is the times for children waiting for an assessment of need, of which the average waiting time is 19 months. Despite a legal requirement for assessment to be completed within 6 months under the Disability Act of 2005. Some are waiting up to 2 years and over. The 6-month timeframe is absolutely crucial because that recognises the vital importance of early intervention for children in these circumstances. It is one of the only legally set timeframes which the HSE must adhere to. And it was put there for a very valid reason. Despite this, the state has consistently failed to live up to its legal requirements to ensure that children can access an assessment of their needs. This is crucial to ensure that the best possible outcome for every child. And we see that if we are to do this and do it within the time frame, it will be possible for proper outcomes for every child. But that isn't happening. 9 out of every 10 children are being failed by this state and failed with their legal right. Yet children are being left behind, and parents are at their wits' end waiting for an assessment for their children. They know that without diagnosis for needs like autism and communication difficulties, their children won't be able to get the vital supports and services they need. Now, a couple of weeks ago, our leader, Mary Lou MacDonald, raised this with the Taoiseach here. And she raised the fact that there are currently parents before the courts trying to address this situation to obtain an assessment of needs for their children within the legally specified timeframe. We have here again, Taoiseach, another situation where citizens of this state are having to go to court to vindicate their rights and the rights of their children. And I'm not going to comment on any individual case, but it has become the default position of the state to force people into legal, stressful and expensive legal battles instead of throwing up its hands and saying that they were wrong. These parents deserve an apology and support, not a legal battle to ensure their children are afforded their legal rights in the first place. You should put yourself in their shoes, in the shoes of the parents. Imagine a day in their lives. Imagine a week in their lives. Imagine a month or often a year where there is no light at the end of the tunnel, watching on and worrying as delays cause harm to their children, harm that is absolutely avoidable. Walking this walk with those parents is the only way to understand why the time frame of 3 and 6 months is set as a legal right. So can I ask the Taoiseach, will the government do the right thing? Will they ensure that children receive the care in which they are entitled to under law? And will you act to ensure that no parent of a child with special needs must go to court to obtain vital and legally guaranteed support for their children?
Thank you, Laskin Corlin. First of all, allow me to formally congratulate you on your recent election to the office of Laskin Corlin. I know you'll do a fabulous job, and congratulations. I want to thank Deputy Doherty for raising this important question.
The microphone.
Excuse me. I may have to move seats to get a mic. My apologies. I just want to thank Deputy Doherty for raising this important question in the Dáil today. I think all of us know from our personal lives, people we know, our constituents who come to us with their problems and their difficulties, how big an issue this is. Children waiting far too long to get an assessment of needs. And we know about more than 6,000 now, I think, are waiting more than 3 or more than 6 months in order to get the assessments of needs that they need. It puts a lot of stress on them, puts a lot of stress on their parents and families, and of course we know that the delay in assessments of needs can be very expensive in the long run because earlier intervention means better outcomes sooner. And a delay in intervention can result in higher costs for the taxpayer in the longer term. So this is a problem that has existed for a long time, and it is one that we acknowledge and want to resolve. The new government is committed to improving access to assessments and therapies for all children who require them. And in order to achieve this, some important reforms are now underway. The HSE Disability Services is currently engaged in a major reconfiguring of its existing therapy resources for children with disabilities into multidisciplinary, geographically based programmes. That's as part of the National Programme for Progressing Disability Services for Young People. And the objective of this is to make sure that we bring about equity of access to disability services. So it shouldn't matter what part of the country a child lives in, they'll have equal access to those services. And also to provide consistency with a clear pathway for children with disabilities and their families to these services, regardless of where they live or what school they go to, or the nature of their particular difficulties. Additionally, a revised standard operating procedure for an assessment of need has been developed, and implementation began back in January 2020, but obviously a lot of that was delayed as a consequence of COVID and the fact that assessments couldn't happen one-to-one. They could happen over video, but not in person, and I think everyone understands why that's not the same thing. The new procedure provides a standardised approach to assessment across all areas and is designed to ensure that children with disabilities and their families can access appropriate assessments and intervention as quickly as possible. The reforms involve important structural changes that will have a positive impact on services for all children with disabilities, including those with autism. And the budget provided an additional £2 million in funding for an autism plan for those services.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Doherty.
Taoiseach, you say you understand, and rightly you make the point that this has been ongoing for a long time. Indeed, 2 years ago when I raised this with the Taoiseach on the floor of the Dáil, there were 3,850 children who were failed by the state at that point in time. Today it's over 5,000. It is only going one direction. It is getting worse. 2 years ago we heard excuses from your government in relation to the reforms that were being introduced. The reality is, Taoiseach, that the state is fighting these parents in the courts. There are numerous cases where parents have been forced to go to the courts to vindicate the rights of their children with special needs because they have been failed for their legal entitlement to have assessment of need carried out within 6 months. The state isn't saying, we're sorry, we'll support you, we'll help you, we're trying to do better. The state is fighting these cases. These families are families that are at the wit's end. Being a parent of a child with additional needs or special needs is a challenge in itself without having to battle every single day for services and supports. And this is only the first hurdle.
Thank you, Deputy.
After the assessment of needs, there is a numerous other battles then to get the speech and language therapy, the SNAs and all of the other things, school placements. So can you give a guarantee that you will not fight these parents in the courts anymore, that you will put in place a robust package of measures to make sure that no child is denied their legal right?
Thank you. Thank you. Taoiseach.
Thanks very much, Deputy. I can't possibly comment on court cases that I have no information about, and even if I did have information about them, I probably couldn't comment on them either. But certainly, anybody's entitled to take their case to court. But I think we all appreciate that this issue won't be resolved in the courts, and it wouldn't be right to give any preference to people who go to court as opposed to those who don't. This is not a problem that will be solved through court cases or by paying lawyers' fees. This is a problem that, if it can be solved, will be provided and solved by additional resources where they're needed and the proper use of existing resources as well. And that's the approach the government is taking.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Moving on to the regional group, Deputy Dennis Naughton.
Thank you, Lascan Corda. Last Monday, the government announced the allocation of €375 million support package for schools to reopen this September. As you'll know, Taoiseach, I've consistently highlighted the need for the reopening of schools here in the House, not only because of the importance for children in terms of their education, but also importantly for their own mental health, due to the lack of engagement with classmates and even the lack of a regular routine. And for the mental health of parents, particularly parents who have been juggling with childcare and employment since last March with no childcare support. We've already seen the impact of the lack of childcare on our frontline healthcare staff, and we're seeing it now again as parents are struggling to find childcare for young children. If schools do not reopen in September, then we'll have a far bigger childcare crisis. But before we face that crisis, we have a current crisis when it comes to providing school places for children with additional needs. This has already spilled over into the public domain, with the then Minister for Education, Joe McHugh, writing to 39 primary schools in South Dublin on the 26th of June, directing them to establish special classes for 4- and 5-year-old children with autism, in order to immediately accommodate 43 children who have no school this September. The Minister took this decision following the advice of the National Council for Special Education, the NCSE, who had failed to convince schools in South Dublin to voluntarily cater for students within their catchment. On Tuesday evening, the Minister for State with responsibility for special education, Josepha Madigan, told the Dáil that she understands that some progress has already been made, and the NCSE is working with several schools to establish classes in South Dublin for the coming school year. But while there has been a very proactive approach taken by the Department of Education to accommodate 43 children in South Dublin for this September, the exact opposite approach has been taken for 8 children in South Roscommon and East Galway, where St Teresa's School in Ballinasloe is willing to establish an ASD class from this September, following a request from the very same NCSE. However, the Department of Education Building Unit is stating that they cannot have a prefab classroom in place in time. But St Teresa's are so committed to accommodating these 8 local children, they have sourced alternative temporary accommodation pending the delivery of the prefab unit. Yet the response from the Department of Education is the same. Due to time constraints, the Department of Education cannot open an ASD class in St Teresa's School in Ballinasloe this year. So my question to you, Taoiseach, is why are children with autism being treated differently just because of their address?
Thank you very much, Deputy, and thank you for staying within time. Taoiseach.
I just want to, at the outset, thank Deputy Naughton for raising this important issue, the establishment of an early intervention ASD class in St Teresa's School in Ballinasloe. I know he's a long-standing interest in disability and looking out for the special educational needs of children in his constituency and beyond. And I know Senator Hopkins has spoken to me about this issue as well. The government is deeply conscious of the worry facing some families in finding suitable accommodation and school places for their children who have special needs. As a government, ensuring every child has a school place is a priority, and we have taken a number of actions to achieve this. Where the National Council for Special Education, the NCSE, identifies the requirement for an ASD early intervention class in the area, the local Special Educational Needs Officer, the CNO, will consider all schools in the area with a view to establishing the class. Early intervention classes are not generally established within special schools, but there are some exceptions in various places in the country. I'm informed the school in question doesn't have the physical space to accommodate an early intervention class within the existing school building. 8 children have been identified by the school, however, and some of these are not yet of age to enrol in early intervention classes. Some are only 3 years old. And in establishing any special class, the NCSE reviews the current and expected future demand for classes, and they have advised the school that they will explore the potential to establish an early intervention class with the school in the near future, but that mightn't be this school year. The NCSE will continue to engage with and advise the school, and the local Special Educational Needs Officer is available to assist and talk to parents of those children with special educational needs about their options.
Can I thank the Taoiseach for his reply? But Taoiseach, the reality is we have children in the catchment of the town of Ballinasloe that have no school place this September. Now, the NCSE has asked schools in Dublin to provide accommodation and have now asked the Minister for Education to direct schools to provide that accommodation. We have the exact opposite situation in Ballinasloe, where a school is willing to come forward and to provide the facility for children with autism. And yet there is a very, very different approach being taken by the Department of Education purely because of geography. Now, Taoiseach, I have one question for you, and that is, can you advise me on the support that these 8 families can expect for their children as and from the 1st of September, and let me know what to say to those parents of those children regarding the additional supports that will be specifically put in place for them when we are not prepared to provide them with a school the same as every other child should be entitled to in this state, regardless of address.
Thank you, Deputy Tánaiste.
Thanks again, Deputy. There's been a phenomenal investment in special education in recent years. The budget is now nearly €2 billion. 1 in every €5 that we spend on education is now for special education, roughly the same as we put into higher education. And just in the last 10 years, the number of special classes has trebled. There'll be an extra 1,000 special needs assistants for schools this year, and also an additional 120 special education teacher posts, as well as 31 speech and language therapists. So a huge amount of investment has gone into special education in recent years. It is needed. But I know in saying that, that is cold comfort to any parent who doesn't have an answer for their kid or their child this September. Often options can be put together. Sometimes it can involve a home tuition grant. Other potential options can be placed in another school if it's not possible to provide places in these schools. But I do know that Minister Madigan is here. She is interested in the topic, and I'll ask her to speak to the Deputy directly and see if there's more that can be done, because I know that they will want a plan for their child for this September and also for next.
Moving on to the Rural Independent Group, Deputy Danny Healy-Rae.
Thank you very much, Les Concorla. Tánaiste, we have a serious jobs crisis in Kerry. And I wish to raise with you today the closure of Borg Warner in Tralee. This bombshell happened a couple of days ago and has really taken the workers in the town of Tralee by real surprise. It was like something akin to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Tánaiste, I want to thank you for already showing an interest in this serious issue. This amount of jobs, I want to explain to you, if this amount of jobs are being lost in Kerry, which has a population of roughly 150,000, this would equate to 2,100 to 2,200 jobs in the population of the Greater Dublin area of 1.5 million. So if that happened here, I know that every minister and the Taoiseach would be out doing something about it. This is an awful blow to the areas where these workers have lived, mainly in Tralee, Killarney, Listowel and Killarney. These job losses come on top of other job losses, 130 Debenham jobs in Tralee, almost 200 Flexico jobs in Killarney and Carlsavine. Tralee Aquadome is to remain closed until at least next April. This has been a massive attraction and is a serious loss to business in Tralee. The move to cut 3 race nights from the monthly calendar by the Irish Greyhound Board and relocate them to Cork and Limerick has hurt many dog owners and will certainly hurt business in Tralee. I wish to support the Chamber Alliance's Kin Tobin's request that when it comes to economic development, that Kerry be separated from Cork City, as we are and have always been 2 separate regions and should be treated as such. I ask that we set up an emergency job task force to address the jobs crisis in Kerry, and ask that the relevant minister come down to meet the workers and stakeholders in Tralee as soon as possible. I wish to highlight the Carlsavine area, which is totally void of any creation for many years under successive governments. From Kell Station through Carlsavine town, right up around the ring to Sneem and Kinmare, is now totally dependent on a bit of farming, fishing and tourism. Indeed, when the youngsters go off to college, most never return as there are no jobs to come back to. The only thing the government brought to Carlsavine was asylum seekers to an unfit Skellig Star Hotel, where we are told now food and water is now being rationed. The Kerry jobs situation has been exasperated by the Greens programme for government. We are not now going to have Shannon LNG. providing natural gas, which was to create between 350 and 500 badly needed jobs in North Kerry. Even though this company have already spent 70 million euro of their own money, and we're going to totally fund the project themselves. And honestly, we do need the gas for at least 30 more years.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thanks very much, Deputy, for raising the issue of job losses and employment in Kerry. And as we all know, as a result of what's happened to the economy due to this pandemic, we've seen a major increase in unemployment in the last couple of months. Thankfully, it is falling. And people have seen that the number of people on the pandemic unemployment payment, which had peaked at over 600,000, is now down below 300,000 and is still falling at about 20 and 30,000 a week. And that's encouraging. In addition to that, over 400,000 people are having their employment sustained through the government's temporary wage subsidy scheme. In relation to Borg Warner, the news of those job losses came as a terrible blow to the staff and also to the town of Tralee. And I have spoken to the IDA about it, and I've been in touch by conference call with the company and expressed my disappointment that there wasn't any advance notice of this to any government agency. What they explained to me was that demand for their product is in terminal decline, not related to COVID, and they don't see any future product line for that particular factory. So it does have to close. It'll close by the end of the year, although some people will remain on site until the second quarter of next year. I discussed the whole issue of redundancy and the need to make sure that the workers get a good redundancy package, and they said that would be put in place, and they'll negotiate with the representatives about that. And I also asked about the site, because the company owns the site, and I'd like to see a new company come in there and employ people and bring more employment back into Tralee. And they have agreed to work with the government and work with the IDA to find either a new investor or a buyer for that site, so that we can replace some of those jobs, if not all of those jobs, with new jobs for Tralee. And that's what we're working on at the moment. In addition to that, as is always the case, government agencies and supports will click in. The Department of Social Protection will make sure that everyone knows what their rights are if they're losing their job in terms of redundancy and welfare payments. The ETBs will go in, the IT, all of the others will go in to make sure that people are given a whole set of opportunities around alternative employment, education and training, the possibility of a grant to set up a business. All of those things will be offered to the workers so that they know what their options are and their opportunities are, separate from the fact that we are going to try to find an alternative investor for the plant. So it's really bad news, not just for the workers affected, but also the impact on the local economy. And I know comes at a really awful time when people are going into a labour market that is very difficult at the moment. But I can assure the Deputy that the government and its agencies will do everything we can to help the people who've lost their jobs and also to find alternative employment for Tralee.
Deputy Danny Healy-Rae.
Thank you very much, Tánaiste, for your reply. I just want to highlight as well, in very recent times we've lost 45 jobs in Kinmare when Jam closed its outlet. The tourism industry, we have lost hundreds of jobs, drivers and buses, pub workers and many others. Tánaiste, I asked that he urgently probe the possibility of and you have said you're doing that, but I'm asking you to leave no stone unturned in getting Borg Warner or another company to use this very skilled workforce and the facility there. They have many years of experience into the production of some other components like ventilators to deal with the coronavirus, and indeed the production of other needed products like water pumps, which we're importing, for air to water pumps, which we're importing from Germany and Denmark at the present time. I also want to say that we really value our remaining employers, Liebers, Munster Joinery, Hatties and Carsway and all the other small employers who are vital to the economy of Kerry. Many of our manufacturing jobs have been lost over the years to Eastern Europe and have never been replaced. I'm asking to really look at Kerry and to put in place a new task force to deal with the job situation crisis in Kerry, because we're on our knees, Tánaiste, and the county is really suffering. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Deputy, and you can be assured that the government is going to do the best we can and work might and main to find an alternative employer, an alternative investor for that facility. It'd be a shame to see it go unused, and the company says they will work with us on that, but it would be a new company coming in and probably producing something different. Was talking to Minister Foley about this and Deputy Griffin the other day, we're very keen to put government resources behind Kerry and making sure that it gets its fair share of investment. In the last 10 years, the number of IDA jobs in the county of Kerry has increased by 48%, so very much going in the right direction. That might fall back a bit this year, but I think we can make progress again in the years ahead. And of course, one thing that is going to be absolutely crucial for the county, as we all appreciate, is getting our tourism industry up and running again, because it is Ireland's premier county when it comes to tourism. And that's why we took the decisions that we did in the July stimulus package only last week to put in place a stay and spend scheme, which I hope will be useful to the tourist industry in Kerry in the October onwards period, also extending the wage subsidy scheme well into spring of next year and allowing those employers to take on seasonal workers who weren't on the payroll back in February, which is one of the big asks they had. So hopefully we'll start to see some of those jobs coming back.
Moving on to the independent group, Deputy Michael Fitzmaurice.
During the COVID crisis, we have all paid our respects and our thanks to the frontline workers, be it in the health service, be it in shops. But I think one sector, the farming community, the agricultural sector, has kept food on the table, not alone in this country, but for what we export as well for other countries. But farmers, when you talk to them at the moment, Taoiseach, are at a loss in different sectors, where if you want to cut trees at the moment on a forestry that you sowed 30 years ago, with serial objections and incompetence in a department, they cannot do it. There is a situation at the moment where 12,000 people may be soon out of work in the forestry sector where timber is not available, and we are now looking at importing timber from Latvia and other countries to keep jobs going in the different areas. Also, Taoiseach, when you talk to farmers in relation to the gloss, they don't know is it going to be rolled over or not. And on the new cap, we look at a situation that there is a section in it, strictly protected area, under peaty lands, which is Donegal down to Kerry, bar a few areas, that there may not get the new cap funding because of new regulation coming in on it. Taoiseach, your party, and indeed Fianna Fáil, in the last election, after the election was called, in all the hustlings around this country, your candidates and indeed in your manifesto gave a commitment that for the suckler sector, which is 95% of the area I'm after mentioning, from the top of Donegal, along by the Shannon, right down to Kerry, your party and Fianna Fáil, which is 90% of this government, or maybe 95%, gave a commitment that ye would fund a new suckler scheme to protect the suckler farmer. I am asking you the question, Taoiseach, are ye prepared to bring that in shortly? When are you bringing it in? And will you give us a date for it? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Fitzmaurice.
Thanks very much, Deputy. And I think farmers in the farming community have been among the unsung heroes of this pandemic. One of the real worries that we had at the start of the pandemic was distribution, supply, getting food into shops, getting food onto tables, getting food in and out of the island. And between the farming sector, our hauliers and our logistics industry, we made sure that that was never a problem. And we do very much appreciate their role in that, not only making sure that we had solid food supply here in Ireland, but also that other parts of the world and other parts of Europe were well fed also. You'll be aware that this year, or at least in the past year, we've put in place about €100 million of grants for beef farmers, which has helped, and also our loan schemes, the Future Growth Loan Scheme, which is being expanded, and the COVID loan scheme, which will be launched at the end of August, will be open to farmers too, giving them low-cost finance, which will help with cash flow. We've also brought in changes to tax laws as well to allow people who make a loss this year to claim back some of the income tax that they paid last year, which would be helpful in some circumstances. In relation to what you said about sucklers there, I don't think that was a commitment, by the way, in my party's manifesto. It may have been in Fianna Fáil's. I don't think it was in ours. We had something around sheep, but I don't think we had a specific one around sucklers. But I'll double check that, but I think you may be mistaken there. Just in relation to what you had to say about forestry, Minister Hackett now is responsible for forestry, and I know it's something that she's going to work really hard on the period ahead, because we are at an unusual stage at the moment in Ireland where it's almost impossible to either plant or fell a tree for various reasons around licences, and we need to get that sorted out, and it largely relates to legal issues, I understand. It is envisaged that GLAS will continue, at least until we've a new scheme up and running. No formal decision on that, but it is envisaged that it would continue until the new cap starts, or in that transition period. And one thing we'll be working on in the next couple of months is getting up and running the REPS Plus or the REPS 2 scheme, which I know farmers will welcome, using proceeds from the carbon tax to set up a new REP scheme which farmers can avail of to make changes that will be beneficial for the environment as well as for their incomes.
Taoiseach, thank you for your answers, but first of all, I agree with you that the unsung heroes, the 100 million is for a beam scheme when the price of cattle was down to 320 and 330. That was to try and keep a floor under the price of cattle. I am well familiar with the new REP scheme, which is going on a pilot scheme, but a pilot scheme is only going to be a certain number of people over a certain length of time. I beg to differ with you, Taoiseach, because I sat beside your candidate, and indeed the different farming organisations got a commitment right around each constituency from the different candidates, and it's there in black and white where your party and indeed the other large party, Fianna Fáil, and indeed other parties have given a commitment to give a new scheme to the suckler cow to protect it in those vulnerable areas. So once again, I welcome what you have said about the GLAS, that a rollover, but we need clarity on this. We don't need to be hearing, well, I don't know when it'll be. We need to know, when is this coming? The way it takes the wonder out of it for the farmers where they're going. They have been the unsung heroes, you have said. Well, for an unsung hero, you need to give them clarity going forward. And I would once again ask you, will you stand by the commitment that has been made on the suckler herd to give a suckler welfare scheme?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Thanks very much, Deputy Minister Cleary. When he's ready to make an announcement around GLAS will, and I know he'll want to make that as soon as he can. And I don't know the details behind that, but he may need Commission approval or other things to continue it. But I'm sure he will be keen to make that announcement as soon as he can and as soon as it's confirmed. I'll have to pull out the programme for government, but to the best of my knowledge, the commitment that you refer to is not in the programme for government. I may be wrong about that. And in a coalition, it is the programme for government that are the commitments made by the government. And I don't think a specific commitment on sucklers was in my party's manifesto either, by the way, but I will check that out and perhaps I'll stand corrected.
Thank you very much, Agus. Go to Mila Malgut. That's where Takiokta. Thank you very much for your cooperation. And if you can work with me now in the same manner for promised legislation, we'll get through as many names as we can. There are a lot of names here, and I'll do my best to get through them all. Some have been carried over. Deputy Pearse Doherty, 1 minute.
Good to ask Corlia. Taoiseach, a fortnight ago I raised with you the issue of pubs reopening, and you said at that time that NEFIT had not at that point been asked to advise on my suggestion that pubs could potentially reopen on the same basis as restaurants, basically with social distancing, with time limits in place, with table services, just acting as restaurants but without having to serve food. This is obviously particularly important for rural pubs where, as you know, numbers at the best of times are low, and where the reality is that in many areas pubs are the hub of local communities. So can I ask you, Taoiseach, in the meantime, has NEFIT had time or have they been asked to consider that work? And obviously, can you tell us when it is likely that a decision will be made in relation to the same?
Thanks, Deputy. The Cabinet will meet on Tuesday of next week, to make a decision on whether or not we can move to Phase 4 or something like Phase 4. We don't have the formal advice from NPHET on that yet. That, of course, depends on two things: the numbers of new cases in relation to the virus over the last couple of days and the next couple of days, and secondly, any particular bespoke arrangements or guidelines that might be put in place to allow particular sectors to open. I think we'd all like to see the pubs opened with social distancing. I think we'd all like to see people be able to attend much bigger outdoor gatherings, particularly football matches and hurling matches, and we'd all be very keen that that be possible. But the two things we'll have to take into account is the NPHET advice on those specific settings, and also the NPHET advice on how we're doing in terms of the number of new cases and clusters and so on. We won't have that advice until just before the Cabinet meeting on Tuesday, but we'll be able to make an announcement at that point.
Thank you, Tánaiste. Deputy Alan Kelly.
Tánaiste, in relation to, as you know, I've been raising the issue of Minister Coveney's state care. In relation to that, we now know 5 things. Firstly, that you made the request when you were Taoiseach for this, that the current Taoiseach knew nothing about it, even though it was actioned while he was Taoiseach. The Minister for Justice knew nothing about it. That the government decision from 2011 regarding Taoiseach, Tánaiste and Minister for Justice having state cars still stands and hasn't been changed. And there is no paper trail, and all of this has been done orally. So I have 2 questions for you. How could you, as Taoiseach in the last government, make a request for state care for a minister in a government that had not yet been formed? How is that constitutionally possible? And secondly, did you make this request in the full knowledge that Minister Coveney would indeed be the Minister for Foreign Affairs while you were Taoiseach for a government that had not yet been formed?
Thank you, Deputy, and thank you for staying with
us. Thanks, Deputy. There's no mystery here, and there's no conspiracy here, and you can try to exaggerate it and all the rest of it. I'm happy to be very clear about this. There are particular security protocols when it comes to the Minister for Foreign Affairs travelling to Northern Ireland. So when the Minister for Foreign Affairs, whoever he or she may be, travels to Northern Ireland, that person has to have a Garda car and Garda protection, that is an armed driver, and are met at the border by the PSNI, who then escort them throughout Northern Ireland. So that has been security protocol for the best part of 20 years. Usually, for most of the past 10 years, the Tánaiste has also been the Minister of Foreign Affairs, so this hasn't been an issue. But it did happen on occasion when the Minister of Foreign Affairs was not the Tánaiste, that they had to have civilian drivers when they were south of the border, and then also had to have use of a Garda car when going to Northern Ireland, and that would have been the situation that Charlie Flanagan would have dealt with. So when I knew that I was going to be the Tánaiste, and that therefore the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the next government would not be the Tánaiste, I asked the Secretary-General of Government to look into the matter and decide what was appropriate.
Thank you.
That was the beginning and end of my involvement in this.
Tánaiste.
He did make inquiries, and the Garda Commissioner advised that it would be appropriate for the current arrangements to maintain.
Thank you. Bogger Rai, the Social Democrats, Deputy Whitmore.
Thank you. Tánaiste, the programme for government seeks to move beyond division and discord in Ireland and find shared solutions. And as a Social Democrat, we have committed to providing a constructive opposition in this Dáil term. So Tánaiste, it beggars belief that the government have come together as one with Sinn Féin to exclude voices of the Social Democrats, People Before Profit Solidarity and independent groupings